Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, you, our listener, you definitely understand that climate commitments in real estate, well, they're not really optional anymore, are they?
No, not at all.
But today, we're sort of pulling back the curtain on what feels like the industry's maybe great delusion.
Hmm.
That point where decarbonization stops being about, the comfortable low-hanging fruit.
Easy wins.
Exactly, and starts demanding real structural, costly, but absolutely necessary change. We're really shifting focus from those simple fixes to the true hard yards of portfolio transition planning.
That's absolutely right. And our mission in this deep dive is really to get into the research that rigorously defines the monumental financial risk of delaying these deep retrofits.
Right.
We're going to try and map out step by step what a credible investment-grade, portfolio-wide transition plan actually looks like on the ground.
Okay.
Because the core conflict we're navigating here, it's that huge gulf between achieving this sort of illusion of progress, which, let's be honest, is often just carbon accounting window dressing, and setting an actual auditable, financially defensible pathway to, genuine Paris alignment.
And we know what that illusion is built on, don't we? Based on the data we've looked at. Our research defines those quick wins very clearly. We're talking about, switching all the lighting to LEDs, maybe tuning the building management systems, the BMS, right? Making sure they run efficiently.
Standard stuff.
Yeah, smart scheduling of heating, cooling, perhaps throwing in some low-cost roof insulation, maybe signing up for green tariffs just to offset reported emissions on paper.
Right.
And look, these measures matter. They do. They generate initial carbon reductions. They shave off some operational costs. It's not nothing.
They do matter, absolutely. But they are profoundly deceptive when you think about the context of these net zero deadlines looming.
How so?
Well, they give the impression, you see, that the owner is meeting their commitment without having to touch the foundational parts of the building.
Like the structure itself.
Exactly. The envelope, the electrification of heat, which is a huge one, the really complex mechanical systems. Once those easily implementable low-cost steps are done, they're exhausted.
Then what?
Then the owner hits this metaphorical and very real financial cliff edge because they haven't properly sequenced or budgeted for the extremely expensive, the disruptive, and frankly, the mission-critical work that must inevitably follow. It hasn't been planned for.
Okay, let's unpack the solution then. Because the consistent industry pattern we're seeing, it signals this fundamental lack of genuine long-term planning.
It really does.
Particularly when you look at large portfolios. It's like a recurring theme across, thousands of declared net zero commitments globally.
It is, yeah. And the pattern, it usually has three key kind of telltale signs of insufficient planning that we see repeated in the data we analyzed.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first, and maybe the most dangerous, is this phenomenon of unfunded targets. Companies declare these really ambitious net zero or Paris-aligned goals.
Gets good press.
Exactly. They hit the headlines. They check the boxes for the ESG reports. Fantastic. But they fundamentally fail to map out credible capital expenditure pathways, the required capex.
Right.
The actual money needed.
Yes. It's like an intention announced by the sustainability team, maybe, without the actual binding budget commitment from the finance committee.
Yeah, and that's critical, isn't it? Because declaring you'll be net zero by, say, 2045 or 2050, that's the easy part.
Very easy.
But the real challenge is showing exactly where that, multi-million-dollar envelope upgrade is coming from in 2035. And how does that interact with the complex building-wide heat pump installation you've got scheduled for 2038?
Yeah.
Without that CapEx roadmap, the target is, it's functionally meaningless, isn't it?
Precisely. And that leads directly to the second telltale sign we see, which is the lack of asset-level plans.
Okay.
So portfolios, they happily report these headline carbon intensity reductions, which look great at the aggregate level, across the whole fund.
Yeah, the average looks good. Right. They can show maybe a 15% reduction across the entire portfolio.
Yeah.
Mainly due to those quick wins we talked about.
Okay.
But when you actually drill down, building by building, they lack specific auditable transition plans for the individual assets. So if you can't show how building A, which is, say, 50 years old and probably leaking energy like a sieve,
right,
and building B, which maybe has really high tenant density and complex needs, how each of them is going to get to compliance by their necessary deadline, well, then you're simply hiding massive systemic risk under this generalized aggregated portfolio data.
So the portfolio looks okay on paper, maybe even good.
Yeah.
But the reality underneath is potentially a ticking time bomb of unaddressed individual building risks.
Exactly. A ticking time bomb is a good way to put it. And this ties straight into the third and perhaps the most financially damaging failing we see, disconnected business cases.
Explain that.
Well, owners, too, often focus their business cases.
Oh.
The return on investment analysis on individual siloed projects.
Right.
Usually based on the easiest buildings to fix, the ones that give a quick payback to make the numbers look good for that project. Meanwhile, the key financial players, the lenders, the big limited partners who actually invest the capital, and, of course, the regulators, they're demanding portfolio-level credibility.
They want the whole picture.
They absolutely do. They don't want to just see one successful pilot project in your best building. They want to see the entire risk exposure across the whole portfolio and, crucially, how it will be managed over the next, say, 10, 20 years.
Okay. So what's truly illuminating, then, is the result of this widespread delay, this pattern you've described. You termed it the cliff edge. Explain what that moment actually looks like for an owner whose quick wins have, dried up.
Right, the cliff edge. Well, when that low-hanging fruit is exhausted, owners suddenly enter this scenario where they have to handle a whole stack of expensive, interdependent, and highly disruptive projects all at once.
Like what kind of projects?
We're talking deep structural retrofits, comprehensive full-scale electrification, getting rid of gas boilers, entirely major envelope improvements like new facades or windows. And the key is they're all hitting at roughly the same time.
Ouch.
Yeah. And the cliff edge means these projects are triggered not by the owner's own careful, optimized planning.
No, that ship has sailed.
Right. They're triggered by external factors. Maybe a major plant fails suddenly, or a huge regulatory fine is looming just over the horizon. Or maybe a lender simply refuses to refinance the asset because it's too risky.
So the owner loses control.
Completely. And the problem is the interdependency of these big projects. You see, you can't efficiently install a right-sized heat pump system, the electrification piece, until you improve the building envelope first, the windows, the insulation, to reduce the heat load. Otherwise, the heat pump is oversized and inefficient.
Right. Makes sense.
And you can't manage that massive structural work on the envelope without causing serious tenant disruption. It's unavoidable. So without that proactive sequencing, that careful planning years in advance, the owner loses all control. And the result is inevitably rushed, far more costly and highly inefficient interventions. It's panic mode.
No, they're no longer proactively choosing the right, maybe least disruptive time for the work. The disruption is being chosen for them by some external failure or deadline.
Exactly.
Meaning they're operating completely at the mercy of the market or the regulator or just, bad luck with equipment failure.
Precisely. They've lost agency.
Okay. Let's transition now to the core financial risk here. We've established the difference, right? Quick wins are relatively cheap operational fixes. Deep retrofits are capital-intensive, disruptive structural changes. But why does deferring the deep retrofit fundamentally change the cost structure the longer you wait? Why is waiting itself so expensive?
Okay, this is really the crux of it, because the cost and the risk of that delay, they compound over time. And they do so in 5 specific quantifiable ways that the research highlights. This is the crucial distinction, right? Quick wins, like LEDs, you can generally do them later for roughly the same cost and complexity. Maybe slightly more, but manageable.
Right.
Deep retrofits, because of market dynamics and regulation, absolutely cannot be deferred without major financial penalty. Waiting is the expensive option.
Okay, so what's the first compounding risk?
The first one is cost escalation and congestion. The data we examined points out really clearly that as global regulations tighten, and they're tightening everywhere across different sectors simultaneously.
Yeah, everyone's rushing at once.
Exactly. Demand for critical components and the skilled labor needed to install them, it just spikes simultaneously. We're talking about highly specialized items like industrial scale heat pumps, high voltage switchgear, which you absolutely need for full electrification, specialized retrofit labor like facade consultants and installers.
Niche.
Very niche and already in short supply. So the late movers, the ones who delayed, they face significantly higher procurement costs for the equipment. Much longer waiting times. I mean, we're already seeing lead times for critical electrical gear stretch into years, not months.
Wow.
And just greater difficulty securing reliable contractors who aren't already booked solid for the next 3 years.
So if I wait until, say, 2030 to order my big sheet pump system, I'm basically competing with every other panicked property owner across Europe, maybe globally, for the same limited pool of specialized resources. And the manufacturers know this.
Exactly right. You're facing a scarcity premium, big time. And this immediately impacts not just your budget, but also your timeline, creating this horrible double whammy of increased cost and extended delay.
Okay, that's risk number one. What's next?
That leads directly into the second major risk, stranded asset risk. This term gets used a lot, but it's becoming very real.
Define it in this context.
Okay. When assets are inefficient or non-compliant with upcoming regulations, these so-called brown discounts widen dramatically in the transaction market. Buyers, especially institutional ones, are now conducting extremely rigorous due diligence on this.
They're looking under the hood properly.
Oh, yeah. And they explicitly factor the estimated future retrofit capex and the regulatory risks directly into their offer price. So if your asset is non-compliant, needs a massive capex infusion in 5 years, and sits on, say, an energy performance certificate grade D or E that will soon trigger a fine or maybe even a rental ban.
Yeah.
That liability is discounted heavily today, often by 10%, 15%, or even more off what a comparable green asset would achieve.
Wow. And beyond just the sale price, what's the implication for, like, current debt holders? Your bank, for instance. Is the bank essentially treating these non-compliant buildings the same way they might treat assets in, I don't know, high-risk flood zones or something, as inherently risky collateral?
That's a perfect analogy, actually. Refinancing becomes increasingly difficult, sometimes impossible on reasonable terms. Lenders are tightening their loan covenants, their requirements, and they're just unwilling to underwrite significant risk against an asset that doesn't have a clear, credible, and ideally science-backed transition plan in place.
Because they see the future liability.
They see the building as holding this massive future liability bomb. Your debt service coverage ratio, the DSCR, which banks care a lot about, is potentially undermined because your future net operating income, your NOI, it's suddenly uncertain. It could be subject to fines or unexpected vacancies during retrofits or these massive unplanned capex calls that just drain cash flow.
Okay, so cost escalation and stranded asset risk. What's number 3?
The third issue is compounded disruption. This is about the tenants and the operational pain.
Right.
Imagine doing, say, a small HVAC patch 1 year just to keep the heating running through winter. Then maybe replacing some leaky perimeter windows piecemeal 3 years later because tenants are complaining.
Patching things up.
Exactly. And then finally, having to do a massive electrification of the boiler system 5 years after that because maybe there's a new municipal ban on gas heating.
Okay.
These multiple unplanned, isolated interventions spread across several years, they lead to this constant low-level operational disruption. Tenant frustration builds up, and ultimately it leads to measurable tenant churn. Tenants just get fed up and leave when their lease is up.
Yeah, I can see that.
The research is pretty clear on this. Sequencing the deep work, well, doing it all, say, during a single planned 6-month vacancy window when a major tenant moves out, is dramatically cheaper in the long run and results in far less tenant churn than taking this piecemeal reactionary approach that constantly disrupts everyone.
It seems so obvious when you put it like that, doesn't it? That one major planned inconvenience is better than 5 smaller, unexpected ones.
It does.
But often that immediate pressure of the budget, the year one spend, wins out over the long-term common sense of proper sequencing.
It often does, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that kind of short-sighted view leads us straight to the fourth compounding factor, redundant investments.
Okay.
This is just pure, immediate waste of capital. Simple as that. Owners who are desperately trying to maintain business as usual, maybe they patch up their aging gas heating systems again and again.
Keeping it limping along.
Right. Or worse, they replace a failing air handling unit with a brand new like-for-like gas-fired system because maybe it's slightly cheaper up front than the electric equivalent.
Oh, dear.
That capital investment is immediately redundant because we know electrification is the known, inevitable future requirement driven by policy across most developed markets.
So the owner who spends, say, $75,000 repairing their gas boiler today is essentially just throwing that capital away because the regulatory deadline coming up in 3 years is going to force them to rip it out and buy the $300,000 electric heat pump system anyway.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They are penalized, financially penalized, for that short-term thinking. That $75,000 doesn't move the asset 1 inch towards its actual decarbonization goal. It simply extends the life of a technology that is already financially and environmentally obsolete. It's dead money.
Wow. Okay, that's 4. What's the 5th risk of delay?
And finally, the 5th risk is about missed operational gains. This is the opportunity cost.
Right.
Every single year that an owner defers necessary envelope upgrades, better insulation, high-performance windows, maybe more efficient ventilation systems, and every year they delay electrification.
Yeah.
That represents a year of foregone operational expenditure savings.
Yeah.
OPEX savings. Deep retrofits fundamentally increase efficiency. Full stop.
So you save money on bills.
You save money on utility bills, definitely. You often save on maintenance costs. You might save on carbon tax liabilities, depending on the jurisdiction. Delaying the upgrades means you are paying unnecessarily higher running costs year after year after year. The opportunity cost of that delay, just measured in lost cash flow from higher OPEX, is actually a substantial and perpetual penalty that accumulates over time.
Okay. Those 5 compounding costs, the escalation, the stranding risk, the disruption, the wasted capital, the missed savings, they really reframe waiting or later as an extremely expensive choice, don't they?
Absolutely. It's not a neutral choice at all.
It's an active financial drain. But now we need to look at the external pressures that are making later basically a false option altogether. Particularly, you mentioned regulatory tightening.
Yes, the regulatory landscape, particularly in high-density markets like, say, Europe or parts of North America and Asia, is really making this planning exercise mandatory, not optional anymore.
Okay.
The research we looked at specifically cites the renewed focus on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive in Europe. Let's call it the EPBD. That directive is driving profound change in what needs to be disclosed and the performance obligations buildings must meet.
Right. What specifically is the EPBD doing that should make owners of, well, brown or inefficient assets maybe lose some sleep?
Well, the latest iterations of the EPBD are forcing much clearer disclosure requirements. So everyone knows how leaky your building is.
More transparency.
A lot more transparency. And crucially, it's imposing mandatory minimum energy performance standards, often called MEPS.
Yeah.
These come with hard deadlines.
Right.
And very importantly, the directive focuses particular attention and often accelerated timelines on the worst performing stock.
Yeah.
So if your building sits in, say, the bottom 15% or 20% of energy performance nationally, the regulatory clock is ticking much faster and much louder for you than for someone who already owns a grade A or B compliant property. You're first in the firing line.
Okay.
And this accelerates the shift in the conversation, doesn't it? From just, box-ticking compliance to something much deeper, fiduciary responsibility.
Okay. Explain that link.
Our sources state this pretty unequivocally now. Planning for decarbonization is no longer optional. It is a fundamental fiduciary duty for asset managers and owners.
Why the shift?
Because given the unambiguous regulatory direction, everyone knows higher performance standards are coming, everyone knows greater transparency is coming, failing to plan for multi-million-dollar capital liabilities that are known and inevitable, well, that's essentially failing to manage known financial risks on behalf of your shareholders and your investors. It's negligence, potentially.
That is a critical distinction, isn't it? It moves decarbonization out of maybe the nice-to-have sustainability department project bucket.
Exactly.
And puts it squarely into the core C-suite board-level risk management function. It's about protecting value.
Absolutely. It's a core financial risk management issue now.
So how does this responsibility, this duty, translate directly into actual asset valuation metrics? How does it hit the numbers?
The evidence now is, frankly, overwhelming. Sustainability performance, particularly energy efficiency and compliance trajectory, directly influences valuation. It's creating this clear and widening bifurcation in the market.
Okay.
We basically see a green premium and a brown discount.
Let's take the green premium first.
Okay. The green premium applies to efficient, compliant buildings. The data shows these assets are demonstrably easier to lease up.
Why?
Because corporate tenants increasingly prioritize them for their own ESG goals and employee well-being. They command stronger rents as a result.
Right.
And crucially, they inherently face fewer capital expenditure uncertainties at exit. The big money has likely already been spent or properly planned for. They are essentially perceived as being future-proofed or at least future-resistant against the next wave of regulations.
So buyers are literally willing to pay more because they know the major capex headache for the next decade has already been strategically managed and aligned with regulations. Lower risk.
Absolutely. Less uncertainty equals higher value. Conversely, the brown discount is now pretty much standard for inefficient assets.
How big is it?
These assets are trading at a measurable markdown. The research suggests often 15%, sometimes even more, compared to their green counterparts in the same location. And that discount explicitly reflects the buyer factoring in the necessary future retrofit capex.
Okay.
The financial risk associated with the projected project downtime needed to do the work, and those tightening lending conditions we just discussed. Banks are less keen, buyers are nervous.
So the cost of the delay isn't some theoretical future risk anymore.
Not at all.
It's being explicitly priced in right now, reducing the asset's value during transactions today.
It absolutely is.
Right.
But here's where the strategic planning, the sequencing we talked about, comes in not just as risk mitigation, but actually as a value creator, or at least value preservation. The data really emphasizes that real value is captured or protected through optimized sequencing. What does that mean? It means strategically compressing the major project downtime into the shortest possible window.
Right.
Meticulously aligning those retrofit windows with major commercial events, like a big tenant's lease ending so the space is vacant anyway.
Makes sense.
And maybe timing the big electrification switch precisely when local utility economics or national grid upgrades make it most favorable.
Okay.
By doing this, by having a clear, logical, sequenced plan, owners build a credible pathway. And that pathway lowers the perceived risk for both future buyers and current lenders. And that directly boosts, or at least protects, the asset's value today. It's an active value preservation in the face of market changes.
Okay, so if the single building pilot project and that quick win approach are clearly insufficient,
Yeah, they're not enough.
what does an actual credible investment-grade decarbonization pathway look like when you try to apply it across an entire diverse portfolio? Maybe hundreds of buildings. We need to move beyond the theory now into the concrete, auditable components of a really robust, actionable plan.
Right. A credible plan, one that a CFO or an investment committee would actually sign off on, it has to be comprehensive, and it has to be fully integrated into the financial life cycle of the assets. It can't just be a side report.
Okay.
The research we've analyzed identifies 5 essential components that really elevate a plan beyond just being a simple projection or a target into a genuine executable strategy.
Let's go through them. What's number one?
First, absolutely critical are science-backed targets. This means moving past vague net zero by 2050 declarations.
Yeah, it needs specifics.
You need specifics grounded in science. The sources specifically name-check using recognized frameworks, and the most prominent one in real estate is CRREM. That's the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor.
Okay, CRREM.
You use CRREM to map when each individual building in your portfolio must cross specific carbon intensity thresholds, like kilograms of CO2 per square meter per year, to remain Paris-aligned, based on its type and location.
Okay, we need to pause on CRREM for a second, because it sounds like the linchpin that gives these plans real financial weight, maybe. What exactly does CRREM provide that just setting a simple internal target doesn't? Why is it so important?
That's a great question. CRREM's power is that it grounds your decarbonization pathways in verifiable climate science. It does this by taking the global carbon budget needed to limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees and allocating it down to specific building types, office, retail, residential, in specific geographic locations.
So it's tailored.
It's highly tailored. It doesn't just give you a vague end target. It gives you the asset's specific stranding year.
Stranding year.
Yes, that's the calculated year when on its current trajectory, that specific building's carbon intensity will exceed the allocated budget required for a 1.5-degree pathway.
Okay. A deadline based on science.
Exactly. And crucially, lenders and major investors are increasingly using this stranding year as a hard deadline to calculate transition risk for their loans or investments. So, DREM alignment creates this kind of common language, a transparent way to communicate your risk management approach with finance providers. It makes your plan defensible.
Got it. Okay, so science-backed targets using CRREM is step one. What's the second component of a credible plan?
The second component is rigorous sequencing of interventions. This is really the art of planning, the operational strategy.
Okay.
It involves timing all the major disruptive works, The electrification, the envelope upgrades, maybe new ventilation systems, smart controls, timing them against crucial commercial events within the portfolio.
Like what?
For instance, aligning that expensive facade refurbishment with the building's standard 15 or 20-year envelope maintenance cycle anyway, or coordinating the big heat pump installation precisely with the planned end of life of the existing aging gas boiler system.
So piggybacking on existing cycles.
Precisely. And ensuring wherever possible that both these major interventions are scheduled during a significant lease event, like a major tenant vacating when the building is either empty or mostly vacant, minimizing disruption and lost rent.
Right. So sequencing is all about maximizing the efficiency of the spend and minimizing the financial pain and tenant disruption.
Exactly. It's optimization. Now, the third component is critical for getting financial buy-in, quantifying the outcomes.
Okay. Meaning?
A real plan, an investment-grade plan, must model the full financial and operational picture, not just kilowatt-hour savings or tons of carbon reduced.
Need more than that.
Much more. This includes projections for future energy use,
Okay.
emissions profiles, yes, but also detailed OPEX forecasts, the required capex budget year by year, and crucially, realistic projections of project downtime and its impact on rent.
Ah, the downtime costs.
Yes, and then all these outputs must be translated directly into the core valuation metrics that finance teams understand and use.
Such as?
We must be able to show the projected impact on net operating income, NOI, on the debt service coverage ratio, DSCR, for lenders, and on potential exit capitalization rates when the property is eventually sold.
Yeah.
If you can't show the finance committee or the board how this project improves or protects NOI and asset value, it's just going to remain a sustainability report, not an investment plan.
That really feels like the key shift, doesn't it? Decarbonization needs to speak the language of finance fluently. It has to show how these often very expensive projects impact cash flow stability, debt serviceability, and ultimate asset value.
Absolutely. It has to be integrated.
Well,
Fourth, the plan must optimize under constraints. Because let's face it, we aren't operating in a fantasy world with unlimited budgets or infinite time.
no kidding.
So any viable plan must balance those internal hurdles like acceptable budget envelopes set by the board or required internal rates of return, IRR, for projects against the external constraints, most notably limits on acceptable tenant disruption. You can't just empty a building for 2 years. This requires quite sophisticated trade-off analysis, usually using software modeling. You're looking for the least cost, least disruptive pathway that still achieves the necessary CRREM-aligned compliance goal by the deadline.
Can you give an example of a trade-off?
Sure. The model might show, for instance, that accepting maybe a 5% capex overrun on higher spec insulation allows you to accelerate the project timeline significantly, maybe reducing tenant disruption from 8 months down to just 3.
Ah,
That reduction in disruption could be a massive net win for preserving NOI and tenant relationships, making the slightly higher upfront cost well worth it. It's about finding that optimal balance.
okay. And the fifth component.
And finally, the fifth component is explicit regulatory alignment. The plan must proactively map the known and anticipated regulatory requirements, like the EPBD milestones in Europe, or specific national or city-level measures directly into the portfolio's action calendar.
So you're planning for the regulations.
Yes, you're integrating them from day one. This integration builds a clear, auditable trail. And that trail is what reassures finance providers, LPs, maybe even credit rating agencies about the long-term compliance trajectory of the portfolio. It demonstrates foresight and proactive risk management.
Okay, let me see if I can quickly recap that. CRREM gives you the science-based deadline for each asset.
Yep.
The sequencing component tells you the optimal time to act, aligning with business cycles.
Right.
And the quantification component tells you the financial payoff or the cost of inaction in terms the CFO understands.
That summarizes the process beautifully, yes.
Yeah.
It transforms what looks like a huge liability decarbonization into a managed strategic investment process.
Right. Now let's dig deeper into those economics. For these plans to actually get funded and implemented,
Yeah, the crucial step.
the sustainability case has to move beyond just environmental reporting, as you said. It needs to connect directly to the P&L, the balance sheet, and the final valuation. Owners need to see how decarbonization contributes directly to core financial performance. You mentioned 3 key areas.
That's right. We need to demonstrate the value across broadly. Operating economics, potential revenue uplift, and the impact on financing and exit value.
Okay, let's start with the most immediate financial benefits owners might realize after a deep retrofit, the impact on operating economics.
Okay, the immediate financial benefits here can be really substantial. First, obviously, are the direct energy savings from the increased efficiency. Less energy used equals lower bills. Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Second, we almost always see reduced maintenance costs. Why? Because you're typically replacing old, failing plant equipment boilers, chillers, HVAC units that require constant, expensive emergency patches with new, modern, optimized systems that are under warranty and just run better.
Fewer breakdowns.
Fewer breakdowns, less reactive spending. Third, and this is increasingly important, electrification, combined with advanced building controls, offers critical hedging benefits.
Hedging against what?
Against price volatility, mainly, by moving away from, say, price fall to fossil fuels like natural gas, to electricity, which can potentially be partially generated on-site with solar or purchased via more stable long-term power purchase agreements, PPAs. Owners gain more predictable, stable energy costs. This helps protect the net operating income, the NOI, from geopolitical shocks or wild swings in commodity markets. More certainty.
Okay, that covers the cost side savings and stability. How does deep retrofit planning translate into actual revenue uplift? Can you really charge more rent?
Potentially, yes. The revenue uplift is largely driven by market preference now. Improved thermal comfort levels, superior indoor air quality, which is a huge focus post-pandemic, and importantly, documented compliance with future standards. All these things make buildings much more attractive to high-quality corporate tenants, who are themselves facing their own ESG reporting pressures and demands from their employees for healthier workplaces.
So tenants are driving it too.
Absolutely. And this translates into tangible financial benefits. First, potential rent uplift. Tenants, especially large corporates, are increasingly willing to pay a demonstrable green premium for high-performing, certified, healthy spaces.
Okay.
And second, higher occupancy rates and lower vacancy periods. Because these upgraded compliant assets simply become the preferred choice over aging, inefficient brown alternatives in the same market.
Right.
They lease up faster and stay full longer.
Right. And the third area was financing and exit.
Yes. And of course, the implications here are massive.
Yeah.
I touched on it earlier. But having that credible, sequenced transition plan significantly reduces the perceived risk for finance providers.
Right, the banks.
For the banks, for debt funds. This can lead to lower risk premium being applied, maybe better interest rates, or just generally more favorable overall debt terms. Access to capital is easier and cheaper for green, well-planned assets.
Okay.
And then crucially, at exit, when you eventually sell the building, that documented compliance trajectory, that proof of future-proofing, supports a narrower brown discount, or perhaps even commands a green premium at sale, compared to a similar building without such a plan.
We really need to make this tangible, though. The research provides some specific, almost investment-grade examples of how strategically advancing capex, spending money sooner, can impact financial outcomes positively. Let's maybe dive into the net present value impact first.
Okay, yeah, the time value of money example is a powerful one from the sources. Let's walk through it.
Please.
Imagine an owner has a major, say, $5 million deep retrofit project planned for a building, maybe 5 years out. Delaying it saves cash flow today, which looks good in the short term.
Standard thinking.
Standard thinking. But what if they strategically advance that $5 million spend, pull it forward to today to align perfectly with a major tenant leaving, meaning the building will be mostly empty for, say, 6 months anyway for refurbishment.
Okay. Use the downtime window.
Exactly. By doing the deep retrofit during that existing downtime, they minimize the total lifetime disruption and vacancy costs for that specific intervention. And maybe they also accelerate achieving, say, $500,000 in annual OPEX savings from the efficiency gains. They get those savings starting 4 years earlier than planned.
Right.
The financial analysis in the research shows that this strategic front-loading of capital, even though it's initially painful on the year one budget,
Yeah, big spend up front.
it significantly improves the overall net present value, NPV, of that asset when calculated over a typical 10 or 15-year hold period, even with the higher initial year one spend. The long-term gain outweighs the short-term pain.
So that completely flips the traditional asset manager's mindset, doesn't it? Delaying capital expenditure just to save cash today is often financially illiterate when you measure against the compounding future costs of foregone efficiency, repeated disruption, and those widening valuation discounts.
Precisely. The NPV analysis provides the definitive mathematical proof that timing, strategic timing, is absolutely everything in retrofitting.
Okay. And the second critical example you mentioned relates to risk-adjusted exit value. Explain how having a clear transition plan impacts the final sale price, specifically through the cap rate.
Right. The capitalization rate, or cap rate, It's essentially the expected rate of return on a property investment. Think of it like a yield,
Huh.
and it's a direct measure of perceived risk.
Yeah?
A lower cap rate, often called a tighter cap rate, indicates lower perceived risk, and therefore results in a higher property value or price. Higher risk demands a higher return, so a higher cap rate means a lower price.
Got it. Lower cap rate equals good.
Lower cap rate equals good for the seller, yes. Now, the source material explains very clearly that having a staged, key-arm-aligned transition plan, one that's transparent, science-backed, and shows a clear path to future compliance.
Yeah.
That plan directly supports tighter exit cap rate assumptions compared to a similar, non-aligned asset, even in the same market.
Why? What's the logic for the buyer?
The logic for the buyer is simple. They know the compliant, well-planned asset has a longer expected functional life before needing major intervention. It faces lower mandated future capex risk. It's less likely to be hit by fines or regulations. It's just a safer bet.
Okay.
So if the non-compliant asset next door might be valued using, say, a 6.5% exit cap rate to account for all that required future liability and risk, the fully planned compliant asset might realistically trade at maybe a 5.8% cap rate.
And that difference.
That difference in the cap rate, 0.7%, translates directly into potentially millions of dollars in higher sale price for the exact same building, just managed differently. The buyer is willing to pay a significant premium for the security and certainty provided by your proactive planning.
Wow.
This really solidifies the idea we keep coming back to. Planning for decarbonization is not fundamentally a cost center. It is a critical strategy for asset value preservation and potentially even value creation in this market.
Okay, so for owners listening who are now convinced, maybe slightly terrified,
Perhaps.
and are ready to move from those ad hoc projects and quick wins towards these optimized portfolio-wide pathways, the research lays out a pretty clear, pragmatic roadmap to get started, right? A kind of 5-step process.
It does, yeah. It provides a logical sequence for how you transition the conceptual idea of a plan into an actual, executable, living financial strategy for the portfolio.
Okay, let's walk through it.
Yeah.
Step 1.
Step 1. Establish the truth. You have to start here. This requires building really robust, data-backed baselines for current emissions, actual energy consumption, and the condition of major plant and systems across every asset in the portfolio.
Honesty is the best policy.
Absolutely. It must be an honest, clear-eyed assessment of exactly where you are today. Now, if you have data gaps, and let's be real, most large, diverse portfolios do have gaps,
Of course.
then you must use defensible, consistent assumptions to fill those gaps. And you have to document those assumptions thoroughly so everyone knows how you got the baseline numbers. You simply cannot plan a journey without knowing precisely and honestly where you're starting from.
Right. Get the real data, warts and all, even if the result is a bit painful to look at initially. Okay, what's step 2?
Step 2 is to set the boundary conditions. This is about defining the non-negotiables, the fixed parameters that will constrain the optimization model you'll use later.
Like what kind of boundaries?
These are the fixed hurdles. Things like your overarching corporate net zero targets and deadlines. The hard budget envelops the maximum capital you can realistically deploy per year or per project that you know you cannot exceed.
Okay.
Also, the key commercial constraints, like major lease expiry dates across the portfolio that create potential intervention windows. And finally, your firm's risk appetite regarding things like acceptable levels of tenant disruption. How much pain are you and they willing to tolerate? These boundaries basically define the playing field for your strategy.
Makes sense. Set the rules of a game. Step 3.
Step 3 is where the modeling happens. Generate justifiable scenarios. You typically start by creating what's called a Kenner-aligned base case. This represents the scientifically optimal pathway to compliance if you had theoretically unlimited resources and no constraints.
The ideal world scenario.
Exactly. Then you start layering in your realistic constraints and assumptions from step 2, the budget limits, the timing windows, the disruption tolerance. This step usually involves using specialized planning software or modeling tools. These tools can test potentially thousands of different pathway combinations. They're balancing factors like how much insulation do we add, what size heat pump, do we combine envelope work with electrification or stage it, how much on-site solar is feasible. They crunch the numbers to see which combination performs best financially while still hitting the required compliance goals within your boundaries.
So this is where the planning tool, the software, really does the heavy lifting, crunching all those numbers to find the sweet spot, that optimal trade-off between strict compliance, cost-effectiveness, and operational reality.
Precisely. It's finding the most efficient path through the constraints, which leads to step 4. Select an executable pathway.
Choosing the winner.
Choosing the winner, exactly. Based on the scenario modeling, you choose the specific plan, the sequence of interventions for each asset that demonstrably minimizes the total lifetime cost and disruption across the portfolio, while, and this is critical, maintaining sufficient compliance headroom.
Compliance headroom, what's that?
It means your chosen pathway shouldn't just barely scrape by the regulatory deadline. It needs to be robust enough to handle potential future tightening of regulations or unexpected shifts in energy prices or maybe unforeseen project delays. You need a buffer. The selected plan must be ambitious, but also realistic and resilient.
Okay, makes sense. Build in some contingency. And the final step, number 5.
And finally, step 5 is absolutely crucial for long-term success. Institutionalize the process. This plan cannot be a static document that gets created once, presented to the board, and then filed away.
Right. It needs to live.
It absolutely needs to live. It must be updated regularly.
Mm-hmm.
The research suggests at least quarterly, or whenever significant new performance data comes in, energy prices fluctuate wildly, or regulations evolve, which they will.
Yeah.
This living document, this pathway, must then be locked into the annual budgeting cycle. It needs to be integrated directly into the individual asset business plans that managers are held accountable for. And it needs to be reviewed routinely by the finance committee or investment committee. It has to become a mandatory core part of the ongoing asset management cycle, not a separate sustainability exercise.
That really seems like the true measure of commitment, doesn't it? When the decarbonization pathway becomes the binding budget and operational plan for the next decade or two.
That's when you know it's real.
Okay. So to summarize the bottom line from this whole deep dive, it feels pretty stark. Those quick wins, the LEDs and BMS tuning, they're fine, they're necessary first steps, but they are mathematically insufficient on their own to achieve genuine Paris alignment or even just to navigate the incoming wave of regulation.
Completely insufficient in the long run.
Owners who cling only to them, hoping they'll be enough, they really risk massive future cost blowouts, potentially stranded assets that they can't sell or refinance, and those widening valuation discounts we talked about.
That's the trajectory they're on, yes.
So the only viable path forward, the path to actually winning on cost, on compliance, and ultimately on asset value, is through deep strategic planning. Using science-based pathways like CRREM, carefully sequencing the capex to align with commercial events, and producing financial-grade outputs that speak directly to the balance sheet and the investors.
That's it.
This is where the hard but absolutely necessary work of real estate decarbonization truly begins. It's moving beyond the easy stuff.
It's the essential work now.
Okay. This deep dive, I think, has fundamentally shifted our understanding, or at least reinforced it, of what real estate decarbonization really entails now.
Hopefully, yes.
The primary shift required, it seems, is recognizing that this whole planning exercise is not primarily an environmental reporting chore anymore. It's not just for the ESG report.
No.
It is a strategic financial exercise, absolutely necessary for asset survival and long-term value creation in a market that is very rapidly pricing in this transition risk.
Perfectly put. And the main takeaway then, for you, the listener, listening to all this, it really must be this. The biggest single financial risk in decarbonization today isn't actually the fixed cost of the deep retrofit itself. Yes, it's expensive, but that capital expenditure can ultimately be calculated, budgeted for, and managed with good planning.
Right. It's a known quantity eventually.
It's a known quantity. The single biggest unmanageable risk is the compounding cost of the delay and the resulting loss of control over the timing, over the budget, over the quality of the intervention that delay almost guarantees. You lose the ability to align the work with favorable lease cycles. You lose the ability to sequence it with planned equipment, end-of-life replacements. You're forced into suboptimal, expensive decisions. That loss of control is the real killer.
That's a really powerful point to end on. The planning window is finite, and for many older assets, it's closing fast.
Yeah.
So if we accept that efficient, compliant buildings increasingly command a green premium and inefficient ones inevitably incur a brown discount, here is the final provocative thought, maybe, for you to mull over, building on what we've discussed.
Okay.
What is the true hidden cost measured in net present value, let's say, of a single missed opportunity, a single missed major lease cycle where you could have done the work? Or a single missed plant end-of-life event where you could have switched to electric then? What's the NPV impact when missing that window forces a much more costly, unplanned, and disruptive intervention 5 years down the line? Calculating that specific cost of inaction for your assets, that knowledge should probably drive immediate portfolio-wide action.
It absolutely should.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thank you for joining us.